Hi everybody, today I am so pleased to be showing you my last pattern, which has been developed with the help of a gang of testers. I issued a call on Instagram a couple of weeks ago asking if anybody had time to test a pattern of mine, because when you develop a pattern it's really good to test it on different body shapes and in different fabric, and I don't have the means to sew the pattern in many different sizes, many different fabric, and then try it on many different types of bodies, because I'm only me here. And the girls have been absolutely amazing. They've been insane. They have sewed the garments, taken pictures, videos, sent them to me, and they've pointed out a couple of flaws on the fitting of the pattern, on the file of the pattern. They've also given me their feedback on which fabric was probably best according to them. And so this is what we have. Thank you so much, ladies, girls, women, non-gendered. You're saying here a couple of the girls that have helped with some details on their sizes and the fabric that they picked, and if they had any comments on the project. The main issue that stood out was that there was a flaw at armpit level for the bigger sizes. The fabric was gaping there. I don't know if you can see on the footage before, and so this was solved by adding some darts, but only on the bigger sizes. So if you look at the pattern, you're going to be able to see that the 34 to the 38 do not have darts, and then once we reach 40 and the other sizes that are upwards, we have darts. So which fabrics are the best for this dress? I'm gonna say first that synthetic fabrics are pretty good for this dress. I'm talking about some satin. I mean, you can have non-synthetic satins, of course. You can have silk satin, you can have cotton satins as well. Crepe is good, viscose, rayon, and you might want to choose all these fabrics that I mentioned previously, also blended with cotton, and if you find with linen. Now, I did recommend to the girls linen in the first place because my beige version is made of linen and I think it's just perfect. But as you could see in the intro, a couple of girls chose linen and they didn't find it so great. They found the fabric a bit too stiff and the waterfall neckline didn't set in the right way according to them. So I'm not sure I recommend it anymore right now. If you take some of these synthetic fabrics, you want to be careful with taking something that's not too thin, not too flowy, because you want the fabric to hold that waterfall neckline here. You don't want something too stiff, you don't want something too fluid either. There's got to be a nice in-between. You're going to see later that I made a dress in a light blue pastel satin fabric, polyester, and it's cute. You're going to see the result, but it's a bit too fluid. I wanted to give a big advice, let's say, if you're new to sewing especially. Take your measurements, bust, waist, hips, and know them by heart. And whenever you are picking a pattern to sew, don't get hung up on your size name. Like a lot of people write me and they're like, I'm a US 12. What size is it in your chart? Every country's got different size standards. The measurements should speak for themselves, and measurements are a bit more universal than names of sizes. So take your measurements, know them by heart, and when you're picking a size from the pattern that you like, then you look at the measurement charts. Like all the pattern brands are giving you a measurement chart, and you're going to notice which size is yours, and that way it's going to be closer to fitting you. I don't say it's always exact, huh? People are going to be ranting. So let's say that you have taken your measurements and you have the measuring chart in front of you, and you notice that you belong to different sizes. Maybe your bust is one size, but your waist is different one, and your hips again is another one. Well, it's not very complicated. What you're going to do is you're going to mix several sizes in the same pattern. All you need to do is join the lines of the different sizes. So I'm going to show you how to do that just now, right now. I have printed here, it's a miniature version of the front and the back of the dress. And let's concentrate on the front. So let's say I want to do my own dress, so a mix of a 34 at the bust, a 36 at the waist, and a 38 at the hips. So that's the line of the 34, that's the first one. Second line is the 36, and the third line is the 38. I'm gonna take this ruler, which is a curved ruler, but you don't have to take that, you can just draw by hand. And I am gonna draw a line that connects this part to this part, and when I arrive at the waist with my line, it must be here. You know what I mean? So, for instance,
like this. It doesn't have to be super like perfect either. There we go. So I'll move from 34 to 36, and now I'm going to draw a line that connects the 36 to the 38 at hips level, so at this level, at the widest basically. Like, I guess like this. No, 38 is here. There we go. And then my cutting line is going to be this one till the bottom. Now, that's it. I'm gonna cut. Okay, I have cut my front only. So now we want to report this onto the other part, right? Because we want the curve to be about the same. I want to join my 34 here with my 36 at waist. And then it's got to be moving to a 30. You want basically to match the notches. The notch is here. The notch is here. And then the other notch on the side is here. Okay. So notch, top part. All right, and then notch against notch, 36 notch with the 38. Voila, so the curve is exactly the same one. And then I'm gonna cut the 38. And that's it. Your pattern is ready, and it's across 3 different sizes. Obviously, I didn't have to change the bust parts because they're 34. They're just 34. There's no variation in sizes inside this part.
All right, let's move on to sewing the dress now. So I'm gonna start by showing you the pieces of the pattern. We have here some parts that are already cut and some parts that I've printed and need to cut and assemble together. I'm going to be sewing the dress for a friend of mine who's a 34 at bust and then a 36 everywhere else. So I'm going to be using the parts that I cut for myself for the bust because I'm also a 34. This is the upper back part. It comes in 2 pieces because it is lined, so we have 1 piece of paper for the shell and another piece of paper for the lining. It looks pretty much the same, but it's not entirely the same. If I lay my lining on top of the shell, you can see that the lining is slightly smaller. There's a difference of maybe 2 millimeters on the upper edge. I'm giving you the 2 pieces to print on the pattern, but of course, if you'd rather not waste paper, you can just print the shell. And when you're cutting your fabric, you know that the lining is a bit smaller and that you need to remove like 2 millimeters off the top edge. Then we've got the upper front part, and again it's a 34, and again it is lined, so there are 2 of them, and the lining, same thing, is shorter by about 2 millimeters. And now we're looking at the parts that I have here printed but have not neither cut nor stuck together. It's the skirt parts that I've printed here again for my friend, the front and the back. I'm gonna be laying the sheets of paper here so that you can see what the logic is behind the page order. So as you can notice, we've got letters and we've got numbers as well. The first line is all about A's, second line is all about B's, third line is all about C's, and it would have gone on and on in an alphabetic order had there been more pages. Now, if you look at the columns this time, it's all 1s, on the first column, 2s on the second column, even though I didn't put the pages in the right order. As you can see, it's A1, A3, A2. It should be A1, A2, A3, of course. And so that's how you know which page comes next to which other page. Now I'm going to cut off the margins of my papers. I'm going to be cutting only these margins here, the top and the right part, and actually the far right edge of C3. You don't need to cut it off because there is no shape running over to a C4 page. There's no C4 page, so it's a waste of time and of energy to cut off the edge of C3 on the right. I'm going to be cutting off all the margins of all the pages that are before me. Once you're here, you want to stick the pages together. I usually use tape, but I've seen on Instagram that several girls were recommending using glue sticks. So I bought some. I haven't bought some ever since I was in primary school, and I'm going to try that today. I'm going to stick the pages together. I stick the lines first and then the columns, but you can do it in the order that you like. The whole point is to apply the glue on the margins that you have not cut off. By the way, my verdict about this glue stick is, indeed it is better. I was really reluctant. I've resisted for a while. I am not an early adopter, but in the end, I do recommend using glue sticks. I think it's better. Once I have stuck all the pages together, this is what I have in front of me. These are only the skirt parts, so here the front and the back. And I'm sewing the dress for a friend of mine. Her name is Cecile. I asked her to send me her measurements in centimeters. So we got 79 for the bust, which is close to a 34, 66 centimeters for the waist, it's a perfect 36, and 91 centimeters for the hips, very close to a 36. Since the bust parts are at 34, I need to make a little bit of an adjustment here at the top of the skirt. We want to keep the top of the skirt at 34, where I'm pointing now, but by the time we reach the notch at the waist, we want to have migrated towards a 36. So for this purpose, I'm going to take my curved ruler and I'm going to draw a new line to connect the 34 and the 36. If you do not have a curved ruler, it really doesn't matter, you can just draw the line by hand. I take my pen, this is my line for the 34, and I want it to go over to the 36 once we reach the notch. That's it. This is for the front. And so for the back, I'm going to do it in a bit because I'm first going to cut off my front and then I'm going to transfer this exact curve of the front onto the back. Also right now you see me trace another line in order to reduce the length of the dress. This is something that you don't have to do anymore because I was using here for the tutorial not the last version of the pattern, but now on the very last version there are 3 lines that are marked on the pattern. As I said before, there is a mini version, a knee length version, and then a midi version which is in the middle of the calves. So yeah, I'm still commenting on why I'm doing this, but you don't need to worry about that. I'm gonna cut off my front part. Now I will be transferring this curve that I drew on the front onto the back. For this purpose, I'll flip my paper on the not printed side, so I need to mark the notch again, the waist notch. I'm gonna lay my front on the back and I'm gonna place the waist notch of the front on top of the waist notch of the back. And I'm gonna also lay the top parts on one another, and then I'm just gonna draw the same curve. Now I can cut my back as well. Let me show you the fabric that I picked for this dress. We're talking about a polyester satin fabric. Very flowy, very fluid, nice shimmering surface, as you can see. It's very lovely. This fabric is not easy to sew, so I don't really recommend it. Also, it is fragile. I don't know if you can see here, there are 2 flaws on the fabric already. I don't know what I did, but somehow I pulled a thread. Look, there's a little thread sticking out and you do not want to cut it off. See, the shine is so nice. Cecile, my friend I'm making the dress for, she's quite fair-skinned. She's got freckles, light brown hair and very light blue eyes. So I thought that, this fabric would bring attention to her eyes. I'm now gonna cut the fabric. I'm gonna be paying attention to the grain line, of course, and I'm gonna be using the edge of the fabric to respect the grain line. I'm checking how wide this part actually is, and then I'm gonna measure the fabric, and then I'm gonna fold the fabric on this exact same width. I think it was like maybe 30 centimeters. Let's say it was 30. I measured 30 centimeters, but I pay attention here to the fact that on the very edge of the fabric, there are some holes. So I'm actually adding 2 centimeters. So let's say it was 30. I'm putting my pins 32 centimeters away from the edge of the fabric. And I am going to make sure that the fold of the fabric is on the pins, or that the pins are on the fold of the fabric. I'm now pinning the 2 layers together so they don't move. When I'm satisfied with the placement of the fabric, I take my pattern piece and I'm gonna lay it on the fabric, and I use some weights here to prevent the piece of paper from moving on the fabric. So I used books, but I have also used dishes in the past. Whatever you have at hand is fine. I'm going to be using my rotary cutter to cut off the pattern. And don't forget to transfer the notches as well. They're really important. You know, when you have cut off your first shape, it means that you're going to be losing the edge of the fabric, and then it's a bit annoying to further cut your fabric and your pattern pieces on the grain line. So I am drawing a line here that's going along the edge of the fabric in order to not lose it. A better method is actually to lay all your pattern pieces on your fabric and then cut them all at once. If you don't do that, and if you cut all your pattern pieces one after the other, you might realize when you reach the last ones that you actually don't have enough fabric for these. I continue cutting my fabric. I'm going to be cutting the back of the dress. I want to avoid having these flaws, that I pointed out earlier. So I'm going to flip the fabric, and I'm going to use the other side of the fabric to cut off my back. We're now going to be cutting our bust parts. The bust parts are a bit special because they're cut in the bias. What's that mean? That means that they're cut not on the grain line, but at a 45-degree angle of the grain line. What's the use, you may ask? Well, at a 45-degree angle, a fabric that is not stretchy is stretchy. And we want this part to be stretchy because it's at the bust and because we want the color to create this nice draping effect. So I am going to make sure that the edge of my fabric is on a straight line. I'm going to take this big ruler, I think it's a quilting ruler, to draw a line at a right angle from the edge, and then I am going to fold my fabric so that the edge of fabric comes along this line that I just drew. You take the pattern piece and you lay it on the fold. As you can see, it tends to waste a lot of fabric, so I pull a bit to try and waste as little fabric as possible. I'm going to pin the 2 layers of the fabric together so that they don't move, and then I'm going to cut. So now the difficulty is to cut the fabric on the bias when you don't have an edge and when you can't draw a line from this edge using a ruler to make it at 90 degrees, blah blah blah. So this was my difficulty. I played a bit by ear. I folded my fabric at a seemingly 45-degree angle, and then I checked how stretchy the fabric was. When your fabric is at 45 degrees, it's where it's the most stretchy. And that's it. I cut it like that. I pinned first and then I cut it. I also cut the strips that are going to constitute the straps. I've cut all the parts of the pattern. We've got the front here, the bust. The bust is upside down. Better. The back. The upper back part and the upper back part and the bust are lined, so we've got the shell and the lining. The zipper here, 60 centimeters long. It's too long for the project, but better too long than too short. And a matching thread. To start with, I'm going to take the skirt parts, front and back, and I'm going to finish the edges on the sides and at the bottom where the hem will be later. And this is what you get once it's done. Now I'm going to lay my front and my back on top of one another. I'm going to be pinning and I'm going to be sewing them together on about 5 centimeters on the right side. What is it that I call the right side? The right side is the side of the dress that's gonna be under your right arm. So the right side of your body, right? So I'm gonna be pinning first, and I'm gonna be sewing here on the side on about 5 centimeters only. You'll understand later why. I remove the pins, and so this is what you should get. Now I'm going to take the upper parts, front and back. We want the shell, be careful not to take the lining. And I'm going to lay the front and the back right sides together, and I'm going to be pinning the 2 layers together again on the right side of the body. Once it's pinned, I'll sew. 1 centimeter of seam allowance, almost like everywhere else. I remove the pins, and I will be opening the seam allowance and pressing it down open. Once it's done, you can also take the skirt part and press down this little bit of seam allowance that we've just made. I take the skirt part and I lay it on the table, right side of the fabric facing up. I take my upper parts and I'm gonna be laying them on the skirt part, right side down. So right sides together. I'm gonna be pinning, matching the notches. So here I'm pinning the bust part to the front of the skirt, and I just wanted to show you that it's gonna seem like the 2 parts don't match between the notches. It's gonna seem like the bust part is bigger than the skirt part, and the reason why this will happen is because the bust part is cut in the bias, and as I said, when you cut fabric in the bias, the fabric stretches out. So the measurements are correct, it's just that your bust part has stretched. So you want to pin carefully and try to spread out the fabric evenly between the notches. This is what I get once I have pinned the 2 parts together. As you can see, I have used many pins. I'm gonna sew from one end to the other, respecting 1 centimeter of seam allowance. I'm gonna remove the pins, and this is the result. I am now going to stick some interfacing on the side of the dress. This is the side that will be bearing the zipper. So we want to stick some interfacing strip here on the side of the bust part. We don't want to stick the seam allowance, and then we'll stick another piece from the seam allowance till the zipper notch, actually a bit beyond the zipper notch, maybe like 2-3 centimeters after. And we want the interfacing strip to be like 1.5 centimeter, 2 centimeter. The whole point is that the interfacing will come and reinforce the side, because when you'll be pulling your zipper up and down later on, it's going to be pulling on the fabric and it can damage the fabric. The interfacing is going to prevent that. You can buy already made interfacing strips. I think it's more going to be called interfacing tape, but I simply will be cutting some strips off my big interfacing piece that I bought by the yardage at the store. I'm going to be using my ruler and my roller cutter. I mean, nothing fancy here. I'm going to cut the strips 1.5 centimeter wide. You should respect the grain line when you cut. And how long should the strip be? Well, I don't know yet. I'm going to discover. I'm just going to cut some strips. I'll stick the strips on the side, and then whatever is extra, then I just won't use it. So I have the dress in front of me. The wrong side is facing up, and I'm just going to stick the interfacing here with the iron. Obviously, you don't want the heat to be too high when you're sewing plastic fabric, because polyester is a kind of plastic. See if the little strip of interfacing is not long enough. It doesn't matter. You just stick several pieces and you create a little overlapping area. And again, as you can see, I avoid sticking interfacing on the seam allowance. I'm talking about the seam allowance that's connecting the upper parts of the dress to the skirt of the dress. I tidy up a bit before continuing the project. So let me show you a bit closer how I stuck the interfacing here on the sides. See, the seam allowances are still mobile. I'm going to take my strap strips and I'm going to fold them right sides together, like so. I'm going to pin, but maybe you don't have to depending on how slippery your fabric is. And then I'm going to sew, and I'm going to respect 5 millimeters of seam allowance. I cut off the seam allowances. I go get my loop turner and I'm going to turn the straps inside out. If you do not have a loop turner, you might be able to use a safety pin, but be careful because the straps are pretty narrow, so it might be that the safety pin are too big to go through. It can also be that your fabric does not allow being turned inside out like this because the fabric is too rigid, too thick, whatever. It has happened to me before. If it's the case, you might want to sew the straps right sides together, so you'd be folding once like this and once like that, and then one last time like this, and then you'd be sewing all the layers together here close to the edge. It basically looks like bias tape. So my straps are done. I'm going to be sewing them on the dress right sides together. We've got two that are fairly long and we've got two that are shorter, so the longer ones are going on the back of the dress and the shorter ones are going on the front. I'm going to be pinning my straps on the dress, respecting the notches. And then I am sewing the straps in the seam allowance. This is what you should get. I take these parts aside now and I'm going to take my lining. So we have the upper front part and the upper back part, and I'm going to sew them together on the right side of our body, but be careful because this is the lining, so it means the right side of the fabric will be against our skin. This is what I get. I will open the seam allowance and press it down. Once it's done, I'm going to lay my lining on top of the dress, right sides together. I'm going to pin in place along the upper edge, and I'm just going to sew from one end to the other. Here, be careful with the side. On the top, you want to sew on the straps, but not on the side. I'm sewing normally, and the only little thing to observe is that when you are coming close to the front part, so the parts cut in the bias, you might want to pull on the fabric a little bit when you're sewing so that the fabric stretches and you sew on a stretched fabric. I'm mentioning this because I had to redo the seam here. Originally I didn't pull on the fabric while sewing, and then I had this contradiction, which is that the fabric was stretchy, but my seam, because it's a straight stitch, it is not stretchy, and so I was completely losing the stretch given by the bias. Now the thing is, if you stretch the fabric, you're going to have a deeper cleavage in the front, so this is also something that you might not want. You can always make a test, it's just when you unsew the fabric, when you rip the seams, if your fabric is really sensitive and fragile, you want to be careful. I remove the pins. I am off frame right now, but what I was doing here is turning my fabric inside out to check if my straps were free or if I had sewed them along the neckline seam. If it's the case, you just unsew and you do it again. And if it's not the case, that means that you can go ahead and cut off the seam allowances like me. Now we're gonna go ahead and understitch this neckline. So my seam allowance is up, and I fold my lining against my seam allowance like this. Okay, we don't want the seam allowance to be turned downward towards the shell. We want the seam allowance facing upward and being against the lining. Now I'm going to start my seam, and I don't want to start it from the edge here. I want to start it maybe 5, maybe even 7 centimeters from the edge. Once you get around the straps, you understitch as close as you can, but yeah, don't worry, you don't need to get too close. It doesn't really matter. And then once you reach the other end, you also stop here, like 7 centimeters from the edge. I'm going to change presser foot. This is the right one to do what I'm about to do. And here we go, understitching. So obviously once you get close to the straps, you can only get close to a certain point. So you get as close as you can, and then you do securing stitches, you pull the thread away, and then you start a new seam again after the strap. And don't forget, here I'm showing you, I am stopping my seam like 7 centimeters from the edge. And this is what you get. I'm gonna cut off my little threads. Time for the burrito technique. So, I have my lining here, which is in place now. I'm gonna turn my dress so the right side of the fabric is facing up, and then I'm gonna be folding the skirt. Yo, where are you going? And I roll it up. I roll it up. So much so that it's gonna be the skirt part rolled up in between the shell and the lining of the upper parts. In the end, I'm gonna go on the other side of the table. So in the end, it's like the lining and the shell are right sides against one another. The only thing is there's the skirt part that's been rolled up and sandwiched in between these two layers. You want to match the notches carefully and pin all along the edge. Alright, so I have pinned the burrito all along, and we've got something to observe here. We're not gonna sew from one end to the other. We're gonna be starting our seam like 7 centimeters from the edge, which means that on this side we want the lining to not be connected to the shell, so it's gonna open, and then we're sewing, and once we reach the other end we're gonna stop the seam here again like 7 centimeters from the edge.
Here, like okay, like this for instance.
I'm stopping here because I noticed that I think I was sewing several layers together, some layers that shouldn't have been there under the needle, so I stopped the seam. I took my seam ripper and I just corrected the mistake, and then I started sewing again. And so I stopped the seam like 7 centimeters from the edge. Securing stitches. Once it's done, I remove the pins, and then I'm gonna turn the burrito inside out, and here I'm a bit upset because I didn't know I was filming everything in accelerated mode. So I'm gonna show you another footage of another dress that I made, and I luckily had the footage of this part. So you just pull the skirt part out of the burrito, and it's gonna bring the rest along with it. Once it's done, you're gonna press down the upper part of the dress, and here this is where I went wrong because I am not happy with this. The heat was just too strong. I insisted. Yeah, I knew that that was the risk, so at first I only pressed down on the wrong side of the fabric, and then I was like too tempted. I was like, no, the right side must be done as well. It's not flat enough. Yeah, this is what happened. Look, it's right on the front, right on the bust. I mean, am I being picky, or would you actually wear the dress if it showed such a little flaw? Anyways, we keep going. So we are now ready to move on to the zipper that we're gonna sew on the left side of the dress. I'm gonna pin the two sides on one another, and I'm gonna be careful to match this seam here that's at the bust level. I have pinned my two sides together. I want to show you a bit the detail here, because we've got here this seam allowance at bust level that I have pinned upward, and here the other seam allowance at armpit that I have pinned upward as well. When I start my seam, I'm going to stick my needle here, okay? This is where I stick my needle, and this is where I start my seam. I'm going to do securing stitches and then basting stitches down to the zipper notch. Once I reach the zipper notch, I do securing stitches again. Then I changed my stitch length to a regular stitch length, so it's on 2, and then I sew till the end. And here I just noticed that my front and my back are not the same length. I guess I made a mistake at the start when I was shortening the dress to make a mini version. I just didn't put the same measurement on the front and on the back. But luckily this is solvable. So I'm gonna set up my stitch length on the highest possible. For me it's on 6 because I'm gonna be making basting stitches, as I said, at least until the zipper notch. Then I manually stick the needle securing stitches, and then again basting stitches till the zipper notch. At the zipper notch I make securing stitches, I change the stitch length, I'm gonna go on 2, and then I sew till the hem of the dress. I remove the pins, and here I check where my zipper notch is between the overlocker seam and then the interfacing, so I'm gonna be marking it again with my pen. I'm gonna press the seam allowance open. I took out my sleeve ironing board. In French it's called Jeannette. Jeannette like the first name, which is disgusting. I apologize. I lay the dress on its side on the Jeannette. I'm gonna take my zipper and I will lay my zipper. I'm gonna pin my zipper more exactly on my seam allowance, in the middle of my seam allowance. There is a little subtlety here. You want to pin your zipper at a certain level. You don't want to pin it too high. I finished pinning this side of the zipper, and I just wanted to show you here how close I ended up getting the plastic here to the seam here. So you need to not bring it too close so that you're going to be able later to neatly close things like that, while being able to have, oh, maybe it's too close, see? Being able to have a seam here come at the top, and you don't want to end up, you don't want to end up like this. You don't want the dress to be like, you want the seam to be at the top like that later on. So I think, yeah, oops. I think I can bring it down a bit more. So I've pinned from that distance, it's almost 2 millimeters away. I fold, and we end up like this. We end up with the plastic pretty close to the top, actually. Okay, I'm gonna repin everything because now it's not flat. I have repinned my zipper to the seam allowance, and now I'm gonna be sewing the zipper to the seam allowance. I'm gonna be using a basting stitch, and you want to stick the needle like in the middle of the zipper. You don't want to get too close to the teeth. I'm gonna be using my zipper presser foot. And by the way, even if it's a basting stitch, and the whole point of the basting stitch is to hold the two layers together while being easily removable, I still want to make securing stitches at the beginning and at the end of my seam. Now I'll just go ahead and I'm gonna pin the other side of the zipper. And then I baste, just like I did on the other side. Just one thing that I did differently here, but it's just for you to be able to see things better, is that my basting seam was made using a thread of a darker color. So you're gonna be just able to see a bit better what the basting seam is. Nothing fancy here. Once we have basted the two sides of the zipper and it seems to be well in place, we're going to take our seam ripper and we're going to rip that first basting seam that we did, which was used to connect the two sides together. And once this is done, on the right side of the fabric, this is what you're getting. It's like the two sides of the fabric are opening, and if you pull a bit, then you can see the zipper. I'm gonna open the zipper and I'm gonna be pulling down the pull of the zipper maybe, and I'm gonna insert it in there. I went to get a tweezers because I think I exaggerated a bit with how far down my basting seams were on each side of the zipper to attach it to the seam allowance. Anyways, I'm trying to have that zipper head go down, down, down. Oh my god, I can see the head! So, with a lot of effort, a bit of sweat, and with the help of the tweezers, I finally was able to pull the head of the zipper through. And by the way, I am using an invisible zipper technique that I watched online. I'm going to be linking to this tutorial in the description box so you can watch it with more close-ups and better explanations. And if you are used to another technique, of course, just use your usual technique. You don't have to convert to this one. Now I'm going to be ironing my zipper teeth open so that they stretch out like this, you know, because they're curled inward and I want them to be a bit more open. I don't know if that makes sense. It's not a compulsory step. Just gonna make sticking the needle at the right location a bit easier. Once it's done, I'm gonna go ahead and sew my zipper very close to the teeth, and I'm gonna stop my seam not at the top of the zipper but at the seam line. And also, yeah, I need to go back to a regular stitch length, not to a basting stitch length. You can check that things seem in order. And now I will be seizing my zipper head and I'm gonna pull it all the way up. That passage is a bit narrow for the zipper head. I had to pull very, very strongly, but I made it through. That's exactly one of those moments where you're very glad that you put interfacing, because otherwise, for sure, the fabric would have been damaged. By pulling the fabric, I actually damaged it a bit at some other location. There was one thread that got grabbed at the same time as I was pulling the zipper head upward. We can see it a little bit, but I don't think it's too bad. So the lining is like that. All right, I'll open the lining and I'll flip it so that it comes and is right sides together with the shell. You want to be careful here to respect 1 centimeter of seam allowance. So I'll be folding this like that. 1 centimeter of seam allowance respected. And then you want to fold things. Usually the fabric that I have here extra beyond this little plastic obstacle, usually I take it away like this on the side, like I fold it on the side. Now I can't do that, so I'm just gonna be folding it like this. No, I'm gonna be doing more because I know it's gonna be problematic. I'm gonna have to cut it. There we go. So you're like this, you fold right sides together. This must be flat, nice and flat. The fabric reaches the same level. You know, this level here, this seam, well, we want the inside to stop at the same level. You know, just respecting the seam allowance of 1 centimeter should enable you to reach the same spot, the same line. And now I'm gonna sew from this seam here, fairly close to the teeth. Not as close as we did before, but fairly close until here.
This is what we're getting. Oh my god. So clean. Is it too... Oh. No, this is fine. I was afraid we got too close, see? But there is some space. There is space, yay! Okay, we're doing the same with the other side. Okay, we're pretty good. So here, as you can see, there is some bulk here. It's not such a clean, sharp angle. Now that I have checked that everything seemed okay on the outside, I'm going to be trimming the seam allowance. You want to trim carefully. And there is so much here. I need to cut this. I need to cut this bit here, but this seam up there continues in the seam allowance. And if I cut off the seam allowance, I'm going to be cutting the seam and this will unravel. So I'm going to go ahead first and secure this. I'm going to do some securing stitches on this seam and then I'm going to be chopping this side. Okay, I've done it. So I'm going to cut off this corner. Okay, it's better. Let's close the dress and see. There we go. I'm gonna turn the dress inside out. And I'll have to take care of this bit here. As you can see, this is open, this is open. We are going to sew this bit by hand. We're closing this area like that. This is what the inside looks like once I have hand stitched it. I've also pressed down, but I didn't want to set up the heat on too high because I don't want to burn the fabric and damage it again.
Now it's time to close this open side. I'm gonna pin it and then I'm gonna sew it. I remove the pins and I will be pressing down the seam allowances open. And once this is done, I can move on to the hems. So I have pinned sides together in order to check if my front and my back are straight / symmetrical. Because I don't think I did it so well. Maybe the fabric moved, maybe I wasn't careful. I'm gonna use my ruler and my rotary cutter to remove this weird excess here. And now I was hesitating, should I make a double fold hem, which means that I don't need to finish the edge of the hem, or am I gonna make a single fold hem, which means that I need to finish the edge? I decided in the end I was gonna do a one single fold hem, even though it's less pretty on the inside because you can see the overlocked edge. I decided I was gonna make a 2 centimeter wide hem. So I took my Japanese ruler and a little pencil and I drew some line 4 centimeters from the edge. And then I folded my edge so that it was going to reach this line that I drew, like so. And then I pinned my hem all around and I took out my needle and I hand stitched an invisible hem. And this is the result. As you can see, it's not fully invisible, but I think it still looks neat. The reason why it's not fully invisible is because this fabric is so sensitive, and because of all the shimmer, it makes every little volume discrepancy visible. I had like a weird curve here on the side, but well, it's okay. Anyways, now we need to take care of our zipper, which is almost longer than the dress. Sometimes what you can do is cut the zipper and then cover the tip of the zipper with the same fabric that you use for the dress. But my fabric is difficult to work with, so I'm not gonna make things too hard for myself. I'm just gonna cut it off. The last detail that we want to take care of are these. What do we do with these ends? You could be stitching across and cutting sharply. Not so great. Otherwise, I got these. Make a knot. I like better those that are super slim, like these ones, but these are the ones that I have right now, so these are the ones that I'm going to be using. There we go. The dress is over. Here is the final result of the dress and the hems that we've seen already. On the right side where the zipper isn't, this is how it looks. On the left side, the side with the zipper, this is how it looks. I flipped the dress to see the back, the zipper, and the inside of the zipper. And finally, here's the dress worn. What do you think? I think it's cute, but it looks a bit like I'm about to go to bed, so it's not so easy to wear it. I don't know if my friend is going to be able to pull it out. I mean, it's not going to be able. Is she going to dare? The fabric is a bit dairy. It's a bit too flowy, too liquid to enable the neckline to create this fold. Like on my linen version, for instance, it just folded itself like that. I didn't do anything. I look a bit weird. I look like I'm dead. I'm a zombie. Like the colors of my skin are a bit strange here. Yeah, I hope you had fun watching this tutorial. I hope it was useful. I hope you learned new things. I wanted to thank all the testers once more. Thank you so much. Again, from the bottom of my heart, really. I'll see you soon for another video. Bye. Kiss.